I think those people are coming to work feeling like their job is scratching this itch of like existential purpose beyond just, okay, let me make sure we're moving product and let me make sure we're checking people out on time and all these things. I think these people are coming to work thinking, hey, we're actually transforming somebody's life. And maybe I didn't even know I could do that. And now I'm doing it every day.
Welcome to another episode of the Coiling Solution, where we look to empower you with awareness and actionable insights. On this episode, I'm pleased to welcome Brad Nardick, president of the Bazaar Incorporated, a $50 million distribution company in Chicago specializing in closeout merchandise. Brad is a proud 4-year, letter-winning wrestling graduate from the University of Wisconsin-Madison who majored in rehab psychology. And you know what? He was a USOC committee member for the Paralympic Games in 2016 and was also recently published in Fast Company. Come on, Coiling Solution audience, please join me in welcoming Brad Nardick to the Coiling Solution podcast. Brad, how are you doing today, my man?
I am fantastic, James. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I like to make people feel welcomed.
Right.
Welcome.
We should team up.
So, I was looking forward to this conversation, and I'm going to start trying to help people understand how I meet people. I reached out to you after reading one of your articles, and you've written a couple of very good articles, if I can say so.
Thank you.
And, I quickly picked up your passion for helping people in a very specific way, and really want to dive into that. But before I do so, I'm going to ask a question I always like to ask guests that join the program. Before we dive in, tell folks maybe one or two things about yourself that most people generally don't know about you.
Okay. All right. I have two, I think, that are very important to me, and I think do give a little look as to kind of what I'm interested in. I spent about 16 days living in the Amazon jungle in December last year with like a tribe down there, and kind of using some of their medicinal techniques, and also just spending a lot of time in isolation and silence. So that is one thing most people don't know about me. And I'd say another thing most people don't know is I practice Tai Chi about 4 times a week, which is normally for people who are like 75 years old plus. But I love martial arts. I've been a huge kung fu movie nerd since I was young. So
yes.
It's my way of living out the Bruce Lee life.
Yes. I usually don't have follow-up questions on these, but on both of these. Okay. So on the last one, what's your favorite kung fu movie?
Oh, man. Oh, gosh, James. Probably Ong Bak.
Okay.
And the reason why, I think it's Tony Jaa, and the reason why is it's like he's doing backflips, he's rolling through people's legs, he's kicking 12 guys at once. It's just unbelievable what he does in that movie.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'm such a Bruce Lee fan. It's probably Chinese connection for me. Yeah, so I'm just a hardcore Bruce Lee fan. Yeah. And then the Amazon thing. So I just have to ask, like, what led to that?
Yeah, so about 3 years ago, I went down to Peru on a trip called Entrepreneur's Awakening with 10 other business owners. We studied under a plant medicine doctor, or also kind of in the more modern world called a shaman, for 10 days. And we basically had this mastermind group where we went through hallucinogenic kind of spirit quest type of experiences in this setting in Peru, in the Sacred Valley of the Incas. So that for me was like a huge turning point. I had a lot of change my relationship to fear, change my relationship to wanting to how I approach leveling up in my life, both personally and professionally. And that kind of started a journey of study for me under this kind of ancient system of thinking. And what brought me to the jungle was just to kind of deepen that experience, where it's one thing to be staying at a retreat center for 10 days. You still got your phone, still got some Wi-Fi, got air conditioning and things like that. But living in the Amazon jungle, it's really harsh environment, very isolated. So it was just kind of like a big personal challenge.
Were you awakened? Was the objective accomplished?
I'd say I'm in the process still.
Okay.
It's an everyday thing to be awakened, I think. So, but I learned a lot. Yeah, I learned a lot.
Got it. Awesome. All right. Well, let's start to go into, the main topic today. And I would probably call this what you've called it, really, purpose-driven work and entrepreneurship. And I loved how you phrased it. I really liked some of the things you talked about. But maybe we can start with why. What drove you? What's the why behind your passion for this topic?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. And I think at the most basic level, for the thing I feel like today being able to talk with you, James, who I also think, what you're doing here is so purposeful and so value add for people, on some basic level, connecting with someone like you is proof of how important this is to do in your life. It's kind of to chase that part that says, hey, I feel like there's this deeper meaning. So thank you for having me on, and thank you for letting me tell my story. As to the question of why, I think it's kind of something that when I'm going to kind of rewind a little bit in time. When I was young, I was, young meaning third grade, fourth grade, 8 years old, 9 years old. I was always the kid in my class where if we had somebody in our class who was maybe on the autism spectrum or who had Down syndrome or whatever, like I just was kind of like designating myself like that person's, buddy. And it wasn't really coming from a place of like, ooh, I'm going to have this special job in class. I mean, maybe it was at that point in time, but I just always felt very called to connect with people who were basically dealt a different hand of cards in life. And, so I always felt connected to people who were struggling with a disability of some sort ever since I was young. And I kind of feel like that was like a breadcrumb on the path of purpose. Like it started early where I look back at it now over 20 years later and I'm like, oh, well, that was a clue. At the time, I didn't really know that it was a clue. And then the other thing that happened was as I came up through school, I struggled with ADD. I struggled with ADHD. I wasn't good at math. And I remember from a young age, being going to doctor and them saying, hey, you're going to have to take Adderall now. And you got to do this and you got to do this. And here's what's wrong with you. And I just remember like getting this story beaten into me of like, here's all your limitations. And here's all the way you're not quite as smart as everybody, not quite as good as everybody. And that, like today, when we're hiring people into the business, and I'm happy to get into greater detail what it looks like today. But when I meet somebody who's never had a job, and it's a 22-year-old kid who's got like a lot of fire in his or her belly, and clearly they've just been told the same story to the 10th degree that you need help to do everything and you're never going to be employed, and good for you if you could count your shoes and go to the grocery store. And I just don't see it like that. I just think like what we're trying to do is break through that sort of societal stigma that people with disabilities are like completely limited in what they can contribute.
Were some of the things you described, were they, that's what I'm looking for. Were they assessed ailments of sorts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I think I to some degree, James, I think like you go to a doctor and ask them what's going on with my kid. They can't pay attention. The doctor's like, well, let me tell you these 15 things. I don't know, but the thing I've learned since really diving into the world of disability employment is there's a lot of levels to what disability means. Right. I mean, in the Paralympic Games, there's probably 75 categories of disability between all the sports, right? So you could have somebody who's wheelchair bound. You could have somebody who's blind in one eye. You could have somebody who's blind in two eyes, who's hearing impaired. There's all sorts of things that means. So I think for me, I was an angsty little, hyperactive kid. But what I've learned since is, I try not to lead with that, because I think for some of the people that were really looking to empower and find employment for and find careers for, they're facing a way more challenging set of disability.
So, as you took that with you, what was the first point at which you acknowledged that in terms of turning it into some intentional work, would you say?
So I started working at the family business, which at the time I got here was 53 years old. And I had just gotten done wrestling in college. I was a part of this phenomenal team. All these elite performers. We were one of the best teams in the country. My roommate was a couple-time national champion. And so I had this experience of like, wow, like we are on a mission together. This is unbelievable. And then I go into the family business, and we're in a closeout industry where we buy overstock consumer goods and we move them to discount retailers, and we operate our own chain of retail stores. And I was like working as like an assistant buyer for the first year that I was at the company. And so I went from this thing that felt like really purposeful and glorious to me to like, oh, well, I guess I get to like look through Excel lists for somebody. And it just like, I just had like this big, not that there's anything wrong with that, for the record. I had this big discontent with what I was doing. And I was fortunate that my aunt is an executive coach. And so I called her when I was on my way home from work one day, and I have tears in my eyes, and I'm like really emotional about it. The family business itself, there's all sorts of, emotional challenges that come along with that. And I called her and I said, I just feel like none of this matters, and like, she was like, well, what does matter to you? And I was like, the things I was working on in college, where I was like totally working directly with people with disabilities and studying it and learning it. I was like, I love that. And she was like, well, is there some marriage between what you're doing today and what you were doing then? And that was kind of what planted the seed in my mind of, okay, maybe there's a way that the work with people with disabilities doesn't have to be volunteer work. Maybe there's a way that I can build it in the company. And that was probably 5 years ago. And it took another year before anything even happened. Like, I didn't really know how to act on that. And I think if I could go back and talk to myself then, I would tell myself, like, slow down for a couple minutes and jot down 10 ideas that might make sense. Right. Like, like, it was one of those things, James, where like, oh, I heard this idea and it's kind of sitting in the back of my head, but I never did a lot to get patient and to get intentional and to like put a plan to paper and figure out, could that work? Do you know what I mean?
So do you mean like you just ran after it versus, getting some concepts together and kind of stress test them a bit? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I didn't really at that point in time, I was still kind of in like wrestler mode, which is what I would call it, where like I was a hammer and everything was a nail.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to change my approach to say, maybe I should put together like a game plan, and maybe I should research the local organizations who might be doing this, and are there models for this type of thing that exist already?
Gotcha.
So there was a learning curve to that, just like there's a learning curve to anything, and it was like I was the kid learning to play violin, but they wouldn't give me the bow yet because I could just pluck. And then, but what I think is true for all things that are related to like our deeper purpose is if that intention is there, it's coming from the heart, the purpose will meet you halfway. And so what I mean by that is, I was walking through our office one day, and we get a lot of local donations requests from local organizations that come into our office, right? We sell all sorts of different stuff here. So people come in and say, hey, we're having a fundraiser. Can you donate a couch? Can you donate shirts? Can you donate candy? Whatever it is. So this woman came to the front desk and I just happened to be walking by and she said, hey, we're having a Halloween party at our school and we're looking for donations. And I'm wondering if your company would be willing to donate anything. And so I stopped and started talking to her and I was like, well, what's your school? Who are you? What do you do? And she said, well, we are the Proviso Area School for Exceptional Children. We are 1 mile up the road from you, and we are a school solely dedicated to kids with learning disabilities, kids who are on the autism spectrum, kids who are neurocognitively different. And it was like it was like the first aha moment where I was like, well, this is brilliant. And I said, we're happy to donate stuff to your Halloween fundraiser, but can I come by your school sometime? And I'm trying to start an internship program here. And I think you guys would be the perfect partner. I come by your school sometime and talk to you about it. So me and a colleague of mine named Muhammad Ashraf, who is the right brain of the operation. He's a tremendous asset to our team. We drove up the road, met with her, launched the first internship program. We basically had an agreement where the associates from the school, teachers, would come into the school and come into our business a couple hours a day with the kids and help us coach the kids through their new job. And we started with 10 kids. I think, James, by day 2, there was 5 kids. Like we had 5 kids quit on day 1. We just had no, yeah.
So literally kind of shooting from the hip to a certain degree, right? Had a lot of passion for it, but didn't necessarily have the bedded down infrastructure or process to do it yet.
100%. It was a lot of good intentions and a lot of passion and not a lot of, know-how. But we learned a ton. And I think the lesson for me in that was like, it doesn't always need to be fully stocked. The plan doesn't have to have every resource needed and every expert needed to just get going. And I knew the long-term goal was for us to be experts on our own and not to need another school to come in and teach us how to do this, but to be able to do it up by ourselves.
Yeah.
And so the internship, while that in itself was not like the most successful program, although we did have a couple kids who went through the whole internship, started to work part-time, and we still have a couple working at our store in River Grove who are full-time. So I would consider that alone a success. We learned a ton,
right.
and we learned really from essentially falling completely flat on our face and taking a day and saying, well, what needs to be in place? Like now we have a feel for what this actually works like. What should be in place for this program to take off? And that was kind of like that was like the white belt in karate class, right?
Let me ask you a question, because one of the things you said is, maybe you didn't do enough conceptualizing and stress testing, right, before you went out. And, the interesting thing about that is different, let's call it personality types or even DISC profiles for people like DISC. Mm-hmm. Different people need different levels of information before they feel like they have enough information to move out, right? Some will take a tremendous amount of time in what I call the laboratory, testing and pushing around and whatnot, and may not get out into the road unless another type of personality type pushes them out into the road, right?
Yeah.
And so I can make both arguments, right? What was beautiful though is the statement you made is that purpose will meet you halfway. That's such a powerful statement, because now the question is that I want to ask you is, had you not taken the course you've taken, do you feel like you would have made the amount of progress you've made at this juncture?
Probably not, I would say, but I think again, like it was going to happen, like, and it was something that was brewing inside me, and I knew it was going to happen. But it, I do believe that we would have found another program, and we would have found a way to partner differently. But the thing I love about it, and I think this is part of the question, is like you get started when you're ready to get started.
Right.
right? And I'm not the laboratory person. There's times where I wish I was, but I'm more like a shoot first, ask questions later type of person. And so to me, it was like, hey, we'll roll in and we'll get our hands dirty, and hopefully, the net effect on the people involved, and the net effect on the business will be a positive. So I don't know if today we would be at the point that we're at without that first trial.
Yeah.
And the next couple of years, there was other iterations of that where we had a little bit more success and a little bit more success until eventually we kind of got more in this past year. So 4 years later, after starting it, we had sort of graduated from, the amateurs to the pros, I would say.
One of the things you said very clearly in bringing us together, this idea of, purpose driven work and entrepreneurship being paired, was that you did not want to run a charity. You were very clear about that.
Yeah.
Say a little bit more about that.
I personally believe that, having volunteered on a bunch of nonprofit boards and kind of seeing the nature of how they operate. I also have friends who are involved in nonprofit, and I think there's some amazing nonprofits. So I'm not trying to draw a line in the sand here. But for me personally, I think that when there's not a self-sustaining model in place, the likelihood of having deep impact goes way down. And what I see in the nonprofit world is that, without having any specifics, let's say you and I started a charity and we wanted to, teach people how to sew. We spend so much time raising the money to get the resources to teach people how to sew that we never actually spend any time teaching people how to sew.
Yeah.
And so I think the thing about trying to build disability hiring and disability inclusion and really disability management and disability recruiting. So there's a lot that goes into making this work well. It's not just like, hey, we hire a couple people, maybe they have one arm and we just put them into a place to work and that's it. We go on our merry way. There's a lot that goes into doing it well. But the thing I see is that the effect that it's having on our business that's tangible is the people who we're recruiting are very excited to get the job. They're generally more loyal. We're not having, we've had almost no turnover. We've hired 15 people in the past 3 months. We've had one of them not work out. So, it's really, really brought down our turnover rate. So there's this tangible effect, and it helps us drive the business, which helps us get more resources to do more hiring and to grow the business. And I think in the nonprofit game, I just personally think if the well can't replenish itself, you'll get a couple good donors and they'll be involved for a while, but eventually their money goes away, and then you go into this huge panic to need to replenish the stores of the money. And I'm very fascinated by this new wave of entrepreneurship that really is people starting companies with impact built into it.
Gotcha.
So that's my take. I don't mean to be in opposition of nonprofit, James. I just think that there's
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, I didn't take it that way. I took it as just what you said. In addition to one of the things I think you pointed out, unless I misinterpreted, was, from a time allocation perspective, this element of time spent off mission, not delivering services, as opposed to being out raising donation and funding, versus being an entrepreneur and being able to be on mission almost 100% of the time, delivering things that are in line with purpose and having other people work in that purpose, right? So it's almost like you're doing it exponentially, right? As opposed to having this, tons of time spent, 30, 40, 50% of your time out raising funds. I mean, literally the other day I was listening to a radio program school presidents talking to each other, college presidents, and a new president was taking a role, and a bunch of presidents were giving this guy counsel, and he was so excited about the new president job, and he was talking about all the things he was going to do, and they were going, whoa, slow down. You're not going to have time to do that. Half your time is out raising money. And this new president was like, well, no, I want to be involved in driving new curriculum, and I want to do no. You get your head your provost do this, that, do that. You have to be out arranging galas and this is that and that, and finding new donors, right? You will be largely judged on how much money you can bring in for the institution, right? Not on just the education, right? And you could hear the level of disappointment growing during the course of this conversation, right? And that's kind of some of the stuff I picked up in terms of your point of marrying purpose-driven work and entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, right? And I feel like, well, you had ran a huge division for a very sophisticated international company, right? And I bet that they had ways of tracking, how many times you walked up and down the stairs in a day. And I think the reason why systems like that exist is to make sure, hey, are we putting our time and energy into the right things? And maybe in the big corporate structure, it can sometimes get too skewed towards one direction. But in the example that you're given with the gentleman who would become a president of a university, it's like, I would guess the things that made that person really good and qualified to take that job have nothing to do with fundraising.
Yeah, you could, like I said, you could hear it in his voice. It was just totally a shocker. And in my mind, I was thinking, one, he's shocked, but two, how did he make it that far through the interview process and not know it, right?
Right.
So,
right.
So in this, with what you've done and being able to accomplish, and again, you're running a $50 million company, a lot of employees, bringing folks in with these disabilities and whatnot, helping put them to work and helping them develop. What are some of the benefits you've seen as a result of this work?
I think the best way to talk about that isn't necessarily through the data, where I could talk about like, man, our turnover rate went way down and our employee retention is better and employee engagement is up, and we're actually seeing higher productivity out of some of the folks who we've hired who have disabilities than people without. And so there's these like more hardline benefits that you can get into. But to me, the thing I feel in our building on a day-to-day basis is that every person who works here is aware and is excited about what we're doing in the disability community. And to me, there's this challenge in any business, any organization of like, how do we keep it really fresh, and how do we keep people, excited about what we're doing here, and make sure that we're attracting people who care about the things that we care about. And so much has been written about that. So I think on the more feeling side, I think the people who have worked here a long time that now see we are kind of shifting into a very purpose-driven model are really excited to be part of that. And the other thing I've seen is that for the departments that we have had a lot of success with hiring people with disabilities into their department, I think that the management teams of those departments, one, are gaining a new set of skills. They're using a higher level of emotional intelligence to assess situations and communicate. And you have to learn how to convey messaging in different ways. In some instances, I'm not trying to apply a rule to everything, but I think those people are coming to work feeling like their job is scratching this itch of like existential purpose beyond just, okay, let me make sure we're moving product and let me make sure we're checking people out on time and all these things. I think these people are coming to work thinking, hey, we're actually transforming somebody's life. And maybe I didn't even know I could do that. And now I'm doing it every day. And I'm seeing a person who's never had a job before develop into like this core team member. And so I feel like it's an infectious thing. And I think that's the best benefit we've seen, is that there's a lot of pride in what we're doing, and it adds a lot of depth to, an otherwise pretty kind of cut and dry business of inventory movement and retail. It's adding a lot of spice into it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in retail, that's so interesting, right? Because you've created a huge quote unquote why for everyone in the company, right? That participates in one way, shape, or form, whether they're helping recruit, train, or work side by side with. It's just such a huge why. And retail, as we know, can have razor thin margins, long hours, just a lot of things that some would say are not as attractive as we'd like them to be. And you've just added such a huge why to the DNA of the company and everything it does. When you think about, as we start to wrap up a bit, and people think about, wow, maybe I'd like to do this too, right? I'd like to be more purposeful. We'd like to help folks and things such as that. In your area, while focused on a particular disability, and remind me, Brad, you focus on folks with autism, correct?
James, our policy, our belief system is we are totally agnostic with what type of disability somebody has. So we just hired an injured veteran into a management position to lead a team. We have some people who are on the autism spectrum. We have some people who are just neurocognitively different. We have a person who is hearing impaired. So our policy is we don't really care what's going on, as long as you've got the willingness and attitude for the work.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you.
So if you were coaching someone who said, Brad, I love it. You've been doing this now for a number of years as the president of this company. If you're coaching me and I want to do the same and introduce it to our company, what guidance would you give me as I'm getting started down this path?
The first question I would ask is what is the thing you care enough about to put your neck out on the line for? I think that, to me, is the secret sauce, and the rest of the how and the what, it'll happen. But I would say the very first piece of the puzzle is what lights you on fire. What's the thing you care most about? And if you're not in touch with that, then spending some time alone and getting in touch with it, I would recommend that. But the thing I've found is that it's not been a straight shot. We've had a ton of disappointment, a ton of failure. We've essentially at times put 50% more workload into our week to make sure that we're set up to do disability hiring, disability training, and disability recruitment well. It's not been a thing where I'm like, hey, you know what? I actually don't care this much about it, and it's really hard to get this done, so I'm just going to move on. You got to find the thing that you're willing to go to war for.
Yeah.
And I think if somebody finds that thing and they're deeply in touch with it, then that fuel in the engine is potent, and it can break through a lot of barriers.
Anything from your journey as well, in terms of if you were starting all over again, that you've learned and are doing better at today versus day one, if you could have it in place that you go, yes, I would have loved to have started with these things or these tools or these processes that we have in place now. Any things that maybe a little bit more, certain strategies or tactics, anything float to the top of your mind?
Two things, James. I think I appreciate that question too. I have a tendency to just talk about my feelings all the time. But I do think there's tangible tactics and strategy that are helpful. The place we're at today is we've partnered with a group called Workplace Initiative out of New York. And they have helped us through their partnership hire a full-time behavioral therapist and vocational services expert into our company. And we call this person an embedded specialist. His name is Chris Simler. He's a phenomenal guy. And he's got 20 years plus of basically building disability hiring programs for some of the biggest companies in the world. And so today we have somebody who's full-time responsible for making this program work and run. And it took a long time to get to a point where we could even prove out that that was going to be worth it. So I wouldn't recommend starting there unless you have like a huge budget and you have a lot of runway and you can afford to make mistakes. But if you do have a huge budget, I actually think that the right thing to do is to partner with the expert, you know, and to find somebody who's interested in helping you push this initiative into your company. Don't go at it alone, you know, because just like any sport, just like any art or martial art, there's a massive learning curve. And so right now we have like one of the masters of the game in our building every day, teaching our people, distilling his knowledge into the people who are here. That's been a tremendous game changer for us. And that's what I mean when I say we went from amateur to pro, where our rate of hiring and the amount of community partners that we had involved has gone up just tremendously since he's been here working on it full time. So that's definitely, I think, to me, that's been the biggest level up, is really having the expert in place.
That's probably a lifesaver for you. I mean, just having that kind of expertise that, you know, kind of seen it, lived it, and technically trained for it. I can see how valuable that is. Thank you so much, Brad, for taking the time out of your busy schedule and what you're doing there at Bazaar Inc. to share this. I'm sure that the listeners of the Quarterling Solution will find this of value, and I certainly wish you continued success, both for you and your team. And thank you for all the good work you're doing in that community.
James, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate you reaching out. I'm happy to be in contact, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for giving me a platform to talk about something I care a lot about. And I'm active on LinkedIn, so if anybody listening wants to connect on LinkedIn, that's the best place to stay in touch. And thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you. You are informed, empowered, and can now be accountable. What were some of your takeaways from this episode? I always enjoy hearing from you, so please share. Additionally, if you have questions, here's some things that are new to you, or need some clarity on some of those things, I am here to serve. Go to our website at thequarterlingsolution.com/podcast. Right below the show notes, you'll see a comment section. Tell me about some of your takeaways from the episode. You can ask your questions, you can mention challenges in the areas that we cover, or tell me about guests you'd love to hear from. Alternatively, you can do the same through social media channels of Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Thank you as always for linking up, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.